chaos in that courtroom in Delaware today as that plea deal falls through. Here's CBS's Catherine Herridge describing a moment.
A member of the U.S. Attorney's team told the court that there was no deal. And one of the lead attorneys for Hunter Biden, Chris Clark, said as far as he was concerned, quote, the plea deal was null and void.
The plea deal is null and void. It's out of the way now. ABC News reports on what the judge was asking the prosecutors.
At one point, the judge asked the prosecutors, is there still an ongoing investigation? They said yes. She said, well, how can he plead guilty to part of an investigation when it's still ongoing? All of that, as you can tell, a lot of legal back and forth. It does look like things are back on track, but the bottom line, this Hunter Biden plea deal, which was expected to be a routine matter, wasn't and may still be in jeopardy.
Not at all. And in fact, the resolution as far as today is concerned, Hunter Biden has pled guilty, not guilty, at least for the moment, to these tax charges. And the case is somewhat on ice over the next 2 weeks as the Department of Justice and Hunter Biden's lawyers try and cobble some sort of deal together again. Here to assess everything that just happened is the former U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, Joe DiGenova. Joe, good to have you with us.
Nice to be with you, Vince.
Now, when the announcement was made some time ago that they had reached a deal, an agreement, Hunter Biden's side of the argument seemed to be saying that, hey, we've resolved everything. He's going to plead guilty to these 2 tax charges, and then he'll get a pretrial diversion agreement on the gun felony, which means he won't be penalized for the gun felony. And that's it. Everything goes away. And in David Weiss's statement, he had said at the time that the investigation is ongoing. And I've been confused ever since. How do you reach a plea deal and yet have the investigation continue?
Well, I think what happened was you had two disreputable sides working on a public relations gambit. You had the incompetent U.S. Attorney, David Weiss, thinking he could pull the wool over the eyes of the court and the public and the Congress by hiding the plea deal, first of all. Remember, nobody has ever seen it. We still haven't seen the text of the plea agreement where all this was supposed to be worked out. But it's obvious what happened. What happened was David Weiss said, look, I'm not going to prosecute you any further, but I'm not going to say that in the plea agreement. So just work with me on this. Everything's going to be fine. And Latham and Watkins said, okay, no problem. And I'm sure they told that to Hunter Biden and that he was okay with it. But then when all this stuff broke over the last 30 days and things got really hot and they started leaning on Weiss, and the judge in Delaware got one look at this and said, they're not going to make a fool out of me. I'm going to dig into this. I'm going to ask questions, and I'm going to get answers. And when he asked the U.S. attorney, does he get immunity from everything in this deal, looking at the language of the plea itself, plea deal, which we have never seen, remember, the U.S. attorney said no. And then the defense attorney said yes, and then said, we're not going to have a plea. So we have to see the language of the plea agreement to know what was written and why there was this quote unquote misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding. But lawyers make plea deals all the time. And the one thing you don't get wrong is what you're going to be prosecuted for and what you're not. This is nonsensical. This was a corrupt plea bargain, politically corrupt plea bargain. And David Weiss, this little clown in Wilmington, Delaware, my hometown, I'm so embarrassed for my hometown that they have an idiot like this for the United States attorney. The guy should be ashamed of himself. And good for the federal judge who just socked it to these people. She just asked a few basic questions, and look what happened. The whole thing fell apart.
Judge,
now they're going to reach another deal, quote unquote. Let's see what that is.
Judge Mary Ellen Nareka today. Now, I do have a suspicion about this, Joe, and that the reason the Justice Department wants to keep the investigation, quote, open is to avoid congressional oversight. They don't want the evidence against the Biden family to be made public. So as long as the investigation is considered open, the longer they can delay handing Congress what they need to examine the Biden family's business arrangements.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I mean, it seems to me that what you are watching is a crime in progress with the assistance of the United States government to protect Joe Biden. But with that, what Kevin McCarthy did yesterday when he did that little glissando into impeachment for the first time, that's the first time that word has come out of his mouth. That changes everything because it means they're willing to spend political capital to go after the big guy. And they have every reason and responsibility to do so. So what's happening is Hunter has gotten caught up in the scheme that he and his father created. And now the scheme is beginning to unravel. We'll see whether or not it unravels completely. But there's no way you could possibly be David Weiss and allow the statute of limitation to run on the tax felonies and not get an extension of that. And he didn't do that.
Yes.
He took a dive. And it's just so corrupt. There's no way a legitimate, honorable U.S. attorney allows those charges to fall by the wayside because of the absence of a tolling agreement on the statute of limitations.
So
this is so corrupt.
Let me ask you about the way that this works in the legal system, Joe, because at this moment, we get a judge who's asking good questions, this Judge Mary Ellen Noreika. Will she be the judge that's overseeing this case throughout? Or if, say, Hunter decides he's going to plead not guilty and this thing goes to trial, will they end up perhaps in front of a judge that would treat Hunter Biden's case and all of this corruption, as you've pointed out, more favorably?
Well, she'll have this case until it's over. In other words, if he pleads guilty and she sentences him, then she loses the case and it goes back on what we call the wheel, where it gets distributed to any judge who comes up randomly. Now, there are only, I think, 2 or 3 judges in Delaware, so it's not like she couldn't get it again, but there aren't that many judges. If in fact he goes to trial, then that's going to be a longer process, and who knows what could happen after that. But again, once the case is over, it's over for the judge in question. Then if there are future cases, they get assigned randomly.
Okay. Interesting that FARA violations came up today, this Foreign Agent Registration Act, because the judge asked explicitly about whether or not those continued to be on the table, and the Justice Department conceded, yes, they are. Now, you think, based on your prior analysis, that they're not actually trying to go after Hunter for any foreign business arrangements, but pretty crystal clear that the judge has her head on a swivel here.
Well, it's pretty clear that the U.S. Attorney in Delaware has thrown this case, and he has avoided purposely going after anything that would involve Joe Biden and the rest of the family. So clearly, the judge sees that for what it is, which is blatant political corruption on the part of the United States Attorney. And I can't imagine that a federal judge looking at this conduct by the United States Attorney even wants this guy in her courthouse. This guy is creating a stench in the law enforcement community in that state. But by the way, that state has been known for years for its lack of vigorous law enforcement against politically corrupt people in that state. And that's whether there are Republicans or Democrats who are nominating U.S. attorneys. I mean, I've watched this for years, and it's like Mississippi in 1964.
Joe DiGenova, there's another detail from inside the courtroom today that stood out to me. I see Saul Weisenberg tweeting from the New York Times' Glenn Thrush inside the courtroom saying this, quote, "From the start, the judge seemed highly skeptical of the unusual deal, which offered Hunter Biden broad immunity from prosecution in perpetuity, questioning why it had been filed under a provision that gave her no legal authority to reject it. When she asked Leo Wise, a prosecutor, if there was any precedent for the kind of deal being proposed, he replied, 'No, Your Honor.' So how is it that Hunter Biden ends up with a never-before-seen arrangement other than the corruption of the Biden family?"
You've got it. There's no other reason. This is the U.S. Attorney for Delaware rolling over for the Bidens. Does David Weiss want a judgeship? What does he want? What is he doing? Can you imagine living with yourself, cutting these types of deal in public? I mean, people know what's going on now. This isn't the grand jury process where everything's secret. These are public proceedings. People are going to find out what you've agreed to. This is just ludicrous that you can think you can get away with this. It shows you how dumb the guy is. I mean, he doesn't have any smarts. I mean, it's one thing to do a favor for somebody, but this is so corrupt. It's so unbelievably embarrassing to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Delaware that you can't imagine that the guy would be able to show up in the morning in his office. It's just, and plus, the other assistant U.S. attorneys in the office appear to be just as bad as he is. But from the things that we're reading about, the things that they said and did to protect the Biden family from inquiry, from search warrants, from questioning, from being mentioned in other questions, being asked of other people. I mean, it's staggering when you look at what the United States Attorney for Delaware, David Weiss, did to limit any investigation into the Biden family. I mean, if I were the Attorney General, this guy would be, I'd take this case away from him so fast, but he's doing exactly what Merrick Garland wants him to do.
It is amazing. So as this gets messier, how much do you think this places pressure on Joe Biden to issue a pardon to make this go away?
Oh, I think this creates let's put it this way. Suppose you're Biden, you're Papa Joe, and you're not feeling too well. You're missing a bunch of beats. You can't make it through the day. You can only function maybe 4 out of 7 days a week as president of the United States. Why don't you say, I'm not going to run. I've decided not to, and pardon your son? Because then it doesn't matter. And so what we may be headed to here is if he's going to run for re-election, he can't pardon his son. So, but we're not anywhere near that yet because this judge still has to deal with whether or not there's going to be a plea deal. If so, is he going to go to prison? He will never allow Hunter to go to prison, whether he's president or not. I mean, he will, as soon as there's a jail sentence imposed, he will commute the sentence or issue a pardon. I mean, he will never allow Hunter Biden to go to prison.
But you think we could be looking at the end of Joe Biden's presidency?
Well, I think I would not have said that a couple of weeks ago, but things have sort of snowballed so fast with the revelations of the limited liability companies, the shell companies, the millions of dollars now being confirmed, the FD 1023, more people testifying, and the brilliant testimony of those 2 IRS agents. Because the one thing that they did, they established a benchmark. Everybody knows they're telling the truth because they don't have any reason to lie because they're losing their jobs, they're going broke. The only people who have a reason to lie are the Bidens, and the Democrats on the committee. And watching the Democrats on the committee is one of the most embarrassing things. I've worked in the House and the Senate, and to watch the Democrats now is disgusting. I mean, they're just disgusting.
Yeah, and nobody's more excited today.
And that includes Jerry Connolly from across the river. What a sniveling little snippet.
There you go. We didn't have to dump that part. Thank you very much, Joe DiGenova. Always good to talk to you, sir.